Hello everyone, my name is Cesar Gutierrez. I am a PhD student at UCL, and today I'm going to talk about how a single exposure to both meanings of ambiguous words helps rather than hinders the processing of subordinate meanings. This work has been developed in collaboration with Jenny Roth, Joe Taylor, and Lina Bloch. First of all, we know that there are ambiguous and unambiguous words. Ambiguous words have more than one meaning. For example, the word crane has a dominant meaning, which is more frequent, and refers to the machine for lifting in suspension, and also a subordinate meaning, which is less frequent and refers to the type of bird. On the contrary, an ambiguous word just have one meaning. For instance, the word chef just refers to the person who cooks. So, what happens when we are exposed to an ambiguous word? Well, the literature revealed that people tend to retrieve the most frequent meaning. For example, for the word crane, people will retrieve easily the meaning related to the machine. And the question here is, how do we deal with subordinate meanings? Well, the reordered access model establishes that we retrieve all the meanings of ambiguous words, and using the frequency and the context, we can select the correct meaning. For example, if we read the following sentence, the boys watched the crane by the river and saw that it was injured. If people read the first part of this sentence, the boy watched the crane, they will retrieve the wrong meaning, which refers to the machine. They need the following context to select the correct meaning. On the contrary, if participants read this sentence, the boys by the river watched the injured crane, they will retrieve the correct meaning easily because they have the context to select the correct meaning. So, how can we improve the processing of subordinate meanings? Well, word meaning priming studies have revealed important evidence in this sense. But first, we need to remember that priming happens when an exposure to a word influences the processing of a subsequent semantic related word. For example, if we prime the word crane with the word bird, people will retrieve easily the meaning that refers to the type of bird for crane, and not to the machine that lifts in suspension. Also, there are some key findings with these word meaning priming studies. First, a single exposure to subordinate meanings can increase its availability in future. This has been consistently replicated in lab-based experiments and naturalistic web-based experiments, and this effect can last between 20 and 40 minutes. So, what is the purpose of our study? Well, discover how a mixed exposure to both meanings of ambiguous words influence subsequent processing. And why is this important? Because people are exposed to both meanings in natural language contexts, so these experiments better approximate real-world experience. Also, because there is a lack of studies have explored the consequence of encountering both meanings. So, in experiment 1, this was an exploratory study. We recruited 60 participants. They were trained and tested on subordinate and dominant meanings of 28 ambiguous words, and 7 per condition. Experiment 2 was a confirmatory study. We included 182 participants. They were trained, again, on the subordinate and dominant meaning, but this time we just tested the subordinate meanings of ambiguous words to increase the power of our study. Again, we included 20 ambiguous words, but this time 14 per condition. So here you can see the structure of experiment 1 and 2. Participants first completed a demographic survey. Then they completed the training task, which was a sentence comprehension task, where participants needed to read a training sentence that included our target word, and then a check sentence, and they needed to decide if the information provided in this check sentence was true or false according to the information provided in the training sentence. Then they completed a vocabulary test to evaluate their vocabulary knowledge, and finally, they completed the semantic relatedness task. In this task, participants read a target word and then a probe word, and they needed to decide if this probe word was related or unrelated in meaning to the target word. So, as I said, we included 28 ambiguous words. This word had a dominant and a subordinate meanings, and also included 28 unambiguous words. We included 112 sentences. These sentences included the dominant and subordinate meanings of ambiguous words, and also the meaning of unambiguous words. Importantly, these sentences were selected from the British National Corpus to provide a natural and rich semantic context. Here, you can see some examples of these sentences. For instance, for the word crane, we selected this sentence for the dominant meaning. While her boss took the unsuspecting Caroline out to lunch, Workers hoisted her car 20 feet into the air with a borrowed crane and parked it neatly on the roof. The sentence for the subordinate meanings was, there are many types of fall. For example, the Siberian crane stands 2.5 feet tall, its brilliant white plumage offset by a blood-red beak, face, and legs. Here you can see also an example for an unambiguous word. In this case, the word chef. The restaurant manager can gain maximum exposure for the chef and enhance customers' enjoyment of the food. As you can see here, these sentences provide a clear context to access the right meaning of these ambiguous and unambiguous words. So, well, here you can see the sentence comprehension task. We included, these sentences include the ambiguous and unambiguous words. We included the comprehension check sentence. We included 14 sentences for dominant meanings and 14 sentences for subordinate meanings, and also 28 sentences that include unambiguous words. Here you can see an example trial. Participants saw a fixation marker, then they read the training sentence, which included the target word. They saw a fixation marker again, and finally they read the check sentence, and they decided if this check sentence was true or false according to the information provided in the training sentence. Regarding to the semantic relatedness task, the aim of this task was to measure the processing speed of meaning of ambiguous and unambiguous words. This time we just tested, one meaning per ambiguous word, the subordinate or the dominant meaning, and also we tested the unambiguous words. Participants were tested on 28 trained and 28 untrained target words. Importantly, the probes were selected from the Edinburgh Associated Thesaurus. So here, again, you can see an example trial. Participants saw a fixation marker, they read the target word, they saw a fixation marker again, and finally they read the probe word. And they needed to decide if this probe word was related or unrelated in meaning to the target word. So in terms of outcomes, we were expecting 3 possible outcomes. First, a facilitation effect, faster and more accurate responses for trained versus untrained items. Also, competition, slower and less accurate responses for trained versus untrained items. And finally, no effect after training. The key point here is how the language system deals with this increased availability of both meanings, the dominant and subordinate meanings of ambiguous words. If the system can deal with it, we will expect a facilitation effect. If the system can deal with it, we will expect a competition effect, or maybe there is no effect at all. So before moving on to the results, we use a linear mixed effects model to analyze our data. So here you can see the maximal model. We include the fixed effect of training, ambiguity, and the ambiguity and training interaction. Also, you can see here the random effects. To analyze each fixed effects, the effects of training, ambiguity, and interaction, we used likelihood ratio test. Also, we observed some convergence problems, and we decided to follow bar guidelines to correct these mistakes. So first, we removed the correlations between random intercepts and random slopes. We included the random intercepts, and we removed the random slope that explains the least amount of variance. If this didn't work, we repeated these first 3 steps. So moving on to the results for experiment 1, in this graph, you can see the mean response times in milliseconds observed in the test task. So you can see here in the x-axis the probe dominant, probe subordinate, and probe unambiguous meanings. As you can see here, after training, there is a decrease in response times, mainly for subordinate meanings, and no change for dominant meanings and unambiguous words. The statistical analysis revealed that the effect of training was significant, but the interaction it wasn't. The interaction between training and type of probe word. In this graph, you will see the mean accuracy for probe dominant meanings, probe subordinate, and probe unambiguous words. After training, there is an increase in accuracy for subordinate meanings and no change for dominant meanings and unambiguous words. The LME analysis revealed a significant effect of training and no significant interaction between training and type of probe word. However, we decided to run some post-hoc tests, and we saw that the interaction between subordinate and dominant meaning was significant. There was a significant increase in accuracy for subordinate meanings when they were compared with the dominant meanings. So to summarize the results of experiment 1, mixed exposure showed a small training benefit for subordinate meanings, which was significant just for accuracy, and no training effect for dominant meanings and unambiguous words. However, there were some limitations in this first experiment. First, a small sample size, few items, and some probe words were not very accurate. That's why we decided to run experiment 2, which was a pre-registered study, and the general objective was to replicate the benefit for subordinate meanings of ambiguous word through mixed exposure. And taking into account the results of experiment 1, we were expecting a facilitation effect, faster and more accurate responses for trained versus untrained items. Here you can see the main changes from experiment 1 to experiment 2. First, we included 182 adults. We used this time a 2x2 within subject design because we included the training and untrained condition, and also we just tested the subordinate meanings of ambiguous word and unambiguous words. And the probes were selected from the Edinburgh Associate Thesaurus to secure the association between the probe word and the target word. These changes secured all power ratios. Here you can see, well, these are the results of experiment 2. In this graph, you can see the mean response time in milliseconds, and also, the measures for the subordinate meanings and unambiguous words. So, as you can see here, there is no change after training for unambiguous word, but there is there are faster responses for subordinate meanings after training. The LEMI analysis revealed a significant effect of training and a significant interaction between training and type of probe word. Well, in this sense, we decided to run the post-hoc test, and we found a significant effect of training on subordinate meanings and no significant effect of training on unambiguous words. In terms of accuracy, here you can see the mean accuracy for subordinate meanings and unambiguous words. So after training, there is an increase in accuracy for unambiguous words and subordinate meanings. The LEMI analysis revealed again a significant effect of training, but no significant interaction between training and type of probe word because there is a benefit for both of them. To summarize, experiment 1 revealed that mixed exposure showed a small training benefit for subordinate meanings, just for accuracy, and no training effect for dominant meanings and unambiguous words. And in experiment 2, this mixed exposure showed a significant effect of training for subordinate meanings. This was significant for accuracy and response times, and a small training benefit for unambiguous words, but just for accuracy. So, what's our main finding? Mixed exposure facilitates the processing of subordinate meanings. What's the benefit of this finding? Well, this suggests that recent language exposure can improve the processing of subordinate meanings. And what's our contribution to the literature? This is the first evidence for a facilitation effect for subordinate meanings after an exposure to the dominant and subordinate meaning. And what's next? Well, we want to go beyond priming effects. We want to evaluate long-term effects with the increased training. Also, we want to test training sets with a more natural distribution of word meanings. And finally, we want to see if these benefits for subordinate meanings can be replicated across modalities. And well, finally, I want to thank to my supervisors, Jenny Roth, Joe Taylor, and Lina Blood for their support. Well, that's all that I have to say. If you have any questions or comments, I will be happy to hear them. Thank you.